Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. Taggert had spent weeks wrestling with a gnawing suspicion in his gut, a feeling he had tried to push aside every time Portia walked into a room with that polished calm she always wore like armor, but the truth has a way of clawing its way out of the dark, and when Brad Cooper appeared at his door with a USB drive and eyes trembling from the weight of what he had uncovered, Taggert knew instantly that whatever was coming would shatter the quiet in Port Charles like a thunderclap. It began with a simple medical anomaly Brad noticed in the hospital system. 2 children, Trina and another young patient Portia had once insisted was just a routine case, showed identical genetic markers that could not, be there unless something far deeper linked them, something that pointed directly back to Portia's private research files hidden under restricted access she had no legitimate reason to create. At first, Brad wasn't going to say anything. After all, he had a long history of secrets himself, and the last thing he wanted was to get entangled in another scandal. But when he ran the data again and saw the same pattern, and then, almost by accident, accessed Portia's encrypted notes detailing unauthorized genetic testing, he realized he had stumbled onto something that involved more than hospital ethics. It involved family. It involved identity. And it involved a lie so old it had calcified into the foundation of Portia's life. When Brad handed Taggert the drive, the detective's hand shook, not from fear, but from the terrible possibility that he had been right all along. Portia had lied about Trina's paternity, yes, but this wasn't just about Trina anymore. The second child, the second name, it froze the breath in his chest. Because the other child wasn't some random patient. It was a young boy from a case Taggert had followed closely, a case wrapped in mystery involving an unclaimed infant Portia had once advocated fiercely to protect, insisting the child's biological history didn't matter as long as he was given a safe home. But now Taggert understood why she had said it, because she had known all along who that child belonged to. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Portia had not only concealed Trina's biological father for decades but had also hidden the existence of a sibling, born from a medical crisis years earlier, a child she delivered prematurely during a time of chaos, a child she believed would never survive. Taggert sat in silence as Brad explained the rest. Portia had falsified medical charts to bury the connection, had manipulated genetic reports to keep both children's identities separate, and had worked behind the scenes to ensure neither child would ever be flagged as related. The more Brad talked, the more Taggert felt the ground shifting beneath him, as if the life he believed he had was dissolving into fragments of half-truths and stolen choices. But Brad wasn't finished. He revealed the second secret Portia had buried, one that hit even harder, cutting deeper than any paternity revelation could. Years ago, Portia had been part of a confidential genetic trial, one that tested for hereditary cardiac conditions among newborns. She had received early results indicating one of the children, Trina, carried a dormant genetic trait that could become life-threatening under heightened stress. Portia had been advised to maintain medical monitoring for the child, to keep emergency protocols on file, to inform the family. But Portia, in her fear and pride, had decided not to disclose the test at all. She filed the results away under a false name. She never told Taggert. She never told anyone. She gambled with her daughter's future because she wanted to protect her from a diagnosis she didn't want to face, because she wanted Trina to grow up free of the medical shadow that once haunted Portia's own family. By the time Brad finished, Taggert felt a fire of betrayal burning inside him, the kind that comes not from anger alone but from heartbreak, from years of believing in someone who never told him the one thing he had begged for all along, the truth. He confronted Portia at the hospital, but she knew the minute she saw his face that the walls she had built were falling. She could see the USB drive in his hand, could see Brad standing awkwardly behind him, and her knees nearly buckled. She tried to speak, tried to explain how she had convinced herself she was doing the right thing, that she had acted out of love, out of protection, out of a desperate attempt to control chaos that threatened to destroy her family, but her excuses wilted beneath Taggert's hollow stare. He told her, voice shaking, that love without truth was poison, and she had been feeding it to their family for years. Portia broke, tears slipping down her cheeks as she finally admitted everything, the night she lost the second child only to discover later that he had survived, the way she hid the test results as if burying them would erase the fear, the paternity lie that turned into a lifelong deception she never had the courage to unravel. Taggert felt the final blow when Portia whispered that she had planned to take her secrets to the grave because she believed revealing them would destroy the fragile peace she had worked so hard to build. But in protecting herself, she had robbed both children of the truth that belonged to them. And now, as the truth flooded into the open, spreading from the hospital corridors to the halls of the PCPD and the streets of Port Charles, everything Portia had tried to protect began to crumble. Trina, hearing the revelation secondhand, felt the ground break beneath her feet as she learned she not only had a sibling she never knew existed but that her own mother had gambled with her health. Curtis, blindsided again, demanded answers Portia could no longer provide. And the young boy, the lost child, was thrust into a new storm of questions about where he belonged and who he truly was. Meanwhile, Brad stood off to the side, guilt twisting inside him, because although he knew exposing the truth was the right thing to do, he also understood the cost of ripping open old lies. But Taggert told him something that would stay with him forever: secrets steal more than truth, they steal time, connection, and the chance to heal. And now that everything was out, maybe, for the first time in years, the children involved could finally get the full story they had always deserved. Portia, shaken to her core, realized that the very thing she had feared most, the collapse of her world, was happening not because the truth existed, but because she hadn't trusted the people she loved enough to share it. As the city buzzed with the fallout, as families were reshaped and loyalties tested, one fact became clear: Taggert and Brad hadn't exposed Portia's secrets to destroy her. They exposed them to finally set everyone free. And in the echoes of the chaos she created, Portia stood alone in the wreckage of her choices, knowing that rebuilding trust, if it was even possible, would take far more than apologies. It would take rewriting the entire future of her fractured family, one truth at a time. In the days that followed the explosion of Portia's secrets, Port Charles moved with the uneasy stillness that comes after an earthquake, the kind where everything appears intact on the surface but the foundation beneath has shifted so violently that nothing feels recognizable anymore, and Taggert found himself standing in the middle of this emotional wreckage trying to make sense of what had been taken from him, what had been hidden, and what still remained to fight for, even as every memory he had of Portia now flickered with doubt like a photograph left too long in the sun. Brad, meanwhile, was forced to relive the revelation over and over, replaying the moment he handed Taggert the USB in his mind as if it were a tape stuck on repeat, questioning whether exposing Portia's secrets had truly helped or whether he had unintentionally torn apart a family that had already endured too much. But deep inside he knew the truth had needed to come out because lies, especially lies about children, have a way of stretching across lifetimes, entangling everyone they touch. Portia kept to herself in the aftermath, moving through the halls of General Hospital like a ghost in her own life, speaking only when necessary, avoiding eye contact with colleagues who whispered behind clipboards about protocols, genetic ethics, and whether the board would investigate her for breaching medical confidentiality. Even though they didn't yet know the full scale of what she'd done, they only knew pieces, fragments Brad had been forced to include in the official report once Taggert informed the hospital that there were children whose medical records had been altered without authorization. Curtis, who had once forgiven Portia for hiding Trina's paternity, now found himself grappling with a deeper kind of betrayal, the kind that shakes a person at their core, because Portia hadn't just lied about the past, she had hidden an entire child, a living, breathing human being who could have been part of their family, a child whose early medical crisis had nearly taken his life while the woman who brought him into the world walked around pretending he had never existed. And Trina, who had always been the calm voice, the steady heart of her family, felt emotions she couldn't control rising in waves, first disbelief, then anger so sharp she could barely breathe, then sorrow that curled tightly in her chest until she felt she might break from the pressure, because not only had she been denied the truth about her father for most of her life, she had been denied the chance to know her own sibling, someone who shared her DNA, someone she might have bonded with, protected, built memories with, someone who had grown up without her because her mother decided she didn't deserve to know. The young boy at the center of the second secret, whose life had just been thrust into a storm he never saw coming, was taken in by the courts for evaluation, placed briefly in protective care while the truth about his origins was unraveled piece by piece, and though he didn't fully understand what was happening, He sensed instantly that the world he thought he belonged to wasn't the one written in his medical file, and that the people now fighting over him were not strangers but blood. While investigators combed through years of records, Brad was interviewed several times about how he discovered the anomalies, and as much as he tried to stay detached, the truth was that a part of him felt deeply protective of the boy, not because he wanted custody or involvement but because he knew better than anyone what it felt like to have your entire identity rewritten overnight. Taggert, determined to do right by both children despite the emotional landmines he was walking across, attended every meeting, every hearing, every medical review, refusing to let the system swallow up the boy the way secrets once swallowed him, and every time he looked at the child, he felt a surge of something unfamiliar but powerful: connection, instinct, responsibility, because even though the boy wasn't biologically his, he was tied to Trina, and that meant he mattered. In her house, surrounded by memories she once believed were built on solid ground, Portia replayed every moment she had chosen secrecy over honesty, realizing with each painful recollection that the walls she constructed to keep her past hidden had become a cage, trapping her in lies that now defined her more than anything she had achieved as a doctor or mother, and though she tried practicing the apology she needed to give her daughter, the words felt heavy and inadequate, too small to carry the weight of the years she had stolen from her own children. When Portia finally gathered the courage to speak to Trina, her daughter barely looked at her, staring instead at a framed photo on the mantel, one of them smiling side by side, taken during happier years when the biggest conflict between them was curfew, not lineage, and Portia felt her heart crack when Trina whispered, "You didn't trust me. You didn't trust me with my own life." The confrontation left Portia trembling, her voice barely steady as she tried to rationalize her actions: fear, uncertainty, the desire to protect, but Trina shut down every excuse with a quiet, resolute firmness Portia had never heard from her before, telling her mother that love without transparency wasn't love at all, it was control, and control was the one thing Portia had no right to hold over her. Meanwhile, Curtis wrestled with his own conflict, not wanting to abandon Portia in her darkest hour but knowing that every lie she had told had chipped away at the trust they were supposed to rebuild together, and that forgiving someone for one massive betrayal was not the same thing as forgiving them for a lifetime of deceit, and though he wanted to be the man who could stand by her, he didn't know if his heart could survive another fracture. On the other side of the city, Taggert sat with Jordan at the station, confessing that despite everything Portia had done, a part of him still ached for the woman he once loved, the mother of the child he raised as his own, and Jordan, ever the realist, told him that loving someone who broke you didn't make you weak, it made you human, but choosing whether to let them break you again was a decision only he could make. Brad, witnessing the fractures spreading through multiple families, found himself unexpectedly drawn into Trina's orbit as someone she could talk to, not because she fully trusted him but because he understood the emotional chaos of learning your life wasn't what you thought, and Brad shared advice with a quiet honesty he rarely showed anyone: you get to decide what parts of your mother's choices define you, not the other way around. As the investigation deepened, more of Portia's hidden files came to light, notes she had written during the pregnancy of the second child, files documenting the moment she thought the baby had died, entries showing her panic when she later learned he had survived, records of her attempts to track him but then abruptly giving up when her marriage to Taggert began collapsing under the weight of the paternity lie she was also hiding. These documents painted a picture not of a malicious woman but of someone drowning in fear, someone who made desperate choices in moments of emotional crisis, but they were still choices that harmed others, and the weight of them pressed down on every person connected to the truth. Eventually the boy, now confirmed to be Portia's biological child, was released into temporary care with the Ashfords while the courts sorted out parental rights and long-term guardianship, a decision made partly because Trina requested it, hoping to give him at least one familiar, stable environment during the transition. When Portia saw him for the first time in an official capacity, she nearly collapsed, overwhelmed by the reality that the child she thought she lost, the child she mourned privately for years, had been alive the whole time, growing up without her, learning to walk, laugh, cry, and navigate the world while she lived under the illusion that he had died, and the guilt hit her with such force that she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but fall to her knees in front of him, whispering a trembling apology he didn't fully understand. Taggert witnessed the moment from across the room, and even though a part of him felt sympathy for Portia's anguish, another part of him couldn't ignore the truth. Her secret didn't just affect her, it affected Trina, him, Curtis, and most importantly, the boy whose entire identity had been reshaped without his consent. In the days that followed, the child began building a tentative bond with Trina, sensing instinctively that she was safe and kind, someone he could trust, and Trina, despite all the turmoil swirling around her, felt her heart soften every time she saw him smile, realizing that no matter how complicated things became between the adults, she wanted him in her life. Curtis, too, formed a surprising attachment to the boy, seeing in him an opportunity to give someone the stability he himself never had as a child, and though he didn't say it out loud, he feared that pushing Portia away might cost him the chance to be part of this new, fragile family forming around the truth. Meanwhile, Portia faced disciplinary action at the hospital, and while her medical license wasn't revoked, she was suspended pending a full review, and the humiliation of facing her colleagues, people she mentored, trained with, and worked alongside for years, was a punishment she hadn't anticipated. She felt like a shadow trailing behind the consequences she created, trying to catch up, trying to repair damage so widespread she doubted she'd ever fully make amends. Brad, for his part, found himself unexpectedly respected for his decision to come forward, with some colleagues quietly commending his courage despite knowing his own history with secrets, and though he didn't crave recognition, there was a small sense of redemption in helping bring clarity to two children whose lives had been shaped by lies. Jordan continued to support Taggert from the sidelines, reminding him that healing wasn't linear and that even though the truth had broken open every fault line in his life, it also gave him the freedom to rebuild without illusion. The climax came during a family mediation session where all parties, Portia, Taggert, Trina, Curtis, and legal representatives for the boy, gathered to discuss long-term plans, and the tension in the room was so thick it felt like even the furniture held its breath. Trina broke the silence first, revealing that despite everything, she didn't want her brother to grow up bouncing between households or living with uncertainty about who he belonged to. She wanted him in her life permanently, but she couldn't force a family dynamic with Portia until she rebuilt trust. Taggert supported her, suggesting a gradual, structured plan that prioritized the boy's emotional stability and gave Trina the sibling bond she never had, while allowing Portia to participate only under supervision until she proved she could act in the child's best interest. Curtis, surprisingly diplomatic, agreed to take on more responsibility, offering his home as a stabilizing environment while the courts finalized arrangements. And when Portia finally spoke, her voice cracked as she admitted that she would accept any decision that kept her children safe, even if it meant stepping back from their lives until she earned her place again. The admission stunned everyone into silence, not because it was dramatic, but because it was the first time Portia surrendered control completely, the first time she chose humility over fear. The session ended without full resolution, but with a roadmap toward healing, a slow, cautious, emotionally grueling path that each person knew would take months, maybe years, but one that finally existed because the truth was no longer buried. In the days that followed, Port Charles adjusted to the new reality, a broken family trying to rebuild, a sibling bond forming from the ashes of a long-hidden secret, a community grappling with the ripple effects of one woman's desperate choices, and Taggert and Brad, unlikely allies, quietly acknowledging that while exposing the truth had detonated chaos, it had also opened doors to a future no longer built on lies. And as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Trina stood beside her brother at the waterfront, holding his small hand in hers as she whispered, "No more secrets. Not for us. Not ever again." But even as the first hints of peace settled over the waterfront, Portia watched from a distance, her heart tightening at the sight of her two children together, one she raised with relentless love, and one she lost and found in the same breath. She longed to walk toward them, to take her son's small hand in her own, to tell Trina how proud she was of her strength, but she knew this was not the moment. She had caused too many fractures for healing to happen on her timeline. Instead, she stepped back, allowing them the space she had once tried so desperately to control. Taggert approached her quietly, surprising them both, telling her softly that while forgiveness wasn't guaranteed, redemption wasn't impossible, not if she did the work, not if she chose truth every day from now on. Portia swallowed her tears as he walked away, leaving her alone with the weight of her choices and the faint glimmer of a second chance. Meanwhile, Trina glanced over her shoulder, sensing movement, and though she didn't see her mother, she felt something shift in her chest, a small but undeniable opening, because even after betrayal, the bonds of blood still hummed beneath the pain, waiting for the moment they could begin to mend.